Hello everybody, welcome to today's webinar, The Rise of Cloud Brokers and Integrators amid Hybrid Integrations. I'm Justin Sargent and I'll be hosting today's session. Today's webinar will share insights found in our Cloud Brokerage and Integration Benchmark. If you'd like to learn more about this report, please reach out to myself or one of the analysts after the presentation. Now before we begin, there are a few items I'd like to cover. First, I will be recording today's presentation and posting it on our YouTube site, TBRI channel. We encourage you to visit our channel to watch this presentation or any of the previous presentations we've posted. Second, I will be following up with all of you via email tomorrow afternoon with the link to the recording from today's presentation as well as with the slides, so be on the lookout for that. And finally, we welcome questions on the material we're presenting today. Please send any questions you have through the Q&A function, and we will address as many as we can at the end of the presentation. Now let's take a moment to introduce our analysts. Allan is the Principal Analyst at TBR's Cloud Practice, where he leads TBR's coverage of the technologies and business models at play across the cloud computing landscape. Cassandra Mooshian is a TBR Analyst and lead author of TBR's Cloud Brokerage and Integration Benchmark, which is what we will be presenting today. So with that, let me hand this over to the analyst.
Thanks, Justin. Thanks, everybody, for joining us today. We're really excited to share the insights from this report, which just published, and I think we're seeing a lot of interest both from the vendors as well as customers in terms of cloud brokerage and overall integration to enable hybrid environments. So just to orient you a little bit to some of our other market research and the way that this fits in, we do extensive coverage across the leading vendors in cloud through both vendor reports, benchmarks, and market forecasts. And then the other side of the research, which you'll also see incorporated today, gathers feedback directly from the customers, and it's those green reports right in the center of the screen. We published a customer report on cloud brokerage adoption, perception, customer needs, and so really that both sides, from the vendor view as well as the customers, will be covered with today's presentation. So really, when we're looking at a market, I think both views are very important, both from the vendors with the individual coverage as well as the market, and then rolling that up and validating that with feedback directly from customers. And so that is consistent with a lot of the different ways that we look at the market, what will be presented today. Lastly, don't want to spend a lot of time on this, but it kind of lays out, you'll hear us talk about hybrid cloud during today's presentation, hybrid IT, which is the combination of cloud and traditional IT. Really, I think those are the two most important parts of the taxonomy for what we'll go through today, because we do see hybrid cloud as well as hybrid IT as some of the primary drivers for certainly the integration opportunity, but also for the brokerage side in terms of bringing multiple different components together, but providing more assistance for customers to manage and to implement those solutions within their environments. Last overview before we start to get into the real content here, we have laid out the definitions for both brokerage and integration. So really from a definitional standpoint, we see brokers as third parties that are standing in between customers and the actual cloud services that they're consuming, and adding value through marketplaces, management assistance of some of the modules. And then on the integration side, we're looking at both the cloud-to-cloud integrations and the cloud to on-prem to enable a hybrid IT environment. So those are the overall definitions. The other ways that we're looking at this market is segmenting both those views into platforms or services, which are the high-level categories for how vendors are going to market today, and the ways that customers are actually able to consume and enable the benefits of either brokerage or integration. So there's a lot of different kind of categories rolled in there, but largely it's either a custom services engagement or it's delivered via a platform that the customer is subscribing to. So with that set up, I'll hand it over to the lead analyst on this report, Cassandra Mooshian, to take us through some of the key findings.
Thanks, Allan. So first we're going to set the stage a little bit. We're going to look at the overall cloud market in terms of enterprise adoption to really show the underlying factors in brokerage and integration adoption, So overall, we've been seeing in this kind of newer area of the cloud market, which is that of the brokerage and integration, is that really the evolution of cloud environments, especially in regions like North America that tend to be a little bit further along the cloud adoption curve. It's really creating a lot of cloud and IT sprawl, and there are so many different solutions that need to work together. And from our customer research specifically, we've seen that there are many enterprises that realize that they're not necessarily utilizing all of their cloud solutions to the full potential, and they're really looking for brokers and integrators to help optimize their current deployments rather than necessarily buying net new ones. So that I always say that that's like me. I know that I don't use my iPhone for all of its functionality, but I'm not going to just go buy another phone to do something else. I'm going to, get in touch with somebody who might know more than I do and have them show me how to optimize that. So this graph, just to orient you a little bit, so we survey the cloud enterprise market every 6 months or so. We have since 2010, and so we really just take all of that data and aggregate it up to the highest level, providing, just cloud adoption rates overall, and for the different, as we call them, delivery methods. So as you can see, we have professional services on the left, followed by public, private, and hybrid cloud, respectively. So while there really hasn't been anything drastic over time on this graph specifically, I think that that's because it's really an overall global view, whereas if you looked at this by the different geographies, the trending over time would be a little bit more drastic for certain geographies. And just to orient you a little bit further, when we talk global, we're really talking about the U.S., mature markets in Europe, so that's the UK, France, Germany, as well as India and China.
Yeah. And I think one of the other things when you're looking at this graph is, we'll talk later on about the differences between platforms and services. Mm-hmm. And clearly we've seen continued engagement by enterprises for some outside assistance in the form of services in terms of their overall cloud journey. And that as on the far right, the percentage of hybrid adopters has been slow to increase. As we've engaged with customers, we've seen continued, the shift is more difficult than we'd expected from consuming individual cloud services to really moving to a more interconnected, formal, planned environment, how to implement cloud more deeply within most customer organizations, and that a lot of the services that we'll talk about with brokerage and integration are one of the main ways that we believe more customers accelerate their movement to a hybrid cloud and a hybrid IT environment, and really come up with something that's customized that fits both where they're at as well as their future roadmap, and builds in the cloud components as a piece of that, but it's not one where they necessarily need to build all of the skills and planning exercises in-house. They can have either the brokers or the integrators be a part of that journey with them. And so I think that's, the two ends are really related when we look at our customer research for cloud, that the services is an integral part, I think more so than ever. I mean, the percentage hasn't changed, but the ways that customers are bringing in the services firms certainly has in terms of those broader scale deployments of cloud.
Yeah, and prior to, I guess, over the past year, before that, we really saw cloud professional services as kind of the first step in cloud adoption. So customers are looking to the consultants to design those cloud roadmaps and what have you. And now, yes, there's still that first step of the advisory and the implementation, but now there's also that managed services piece, which is where the brokers and integrators really come into play, and that's providing services throughout the entire life cycle of the cloud engagement with the vendor. So it's more of a, it's similar to more of an outsourcing type of contract, but with a cloud environment instead of that traditional IT environment. So this slide kind of takes a look, and Allan, feel free to jump in, but this takes a look at the vendor portfolio evolution versus the average customer cloud migration. So to orient you a little bit, you can see that the vendor portfolio evolution is somewhat linear. You know, the gray area being, you know, that traditional IT component. And then starting from left to right, we have public cloud, then move up to private cloud, and then we have the hybrid cloud and hybrid IT. And then below that is the customer migration path, which, you know, starts with traditional on-prem IT and migrates all the way over to that hybrid IT piece. But there are definitely barriers in the way that are complicating the process and causing customers to lag a little bit behind where I think vendors expected the customers to be at certain points.
Yeah, absolutely. I think to sum it up, it's a situation in today's market as we see it that for the most part, particularly for enterprise customers, the large vendors have either acquired or built portfolios that exceed the ability of customers to consume and benefit from them. And so I think brokerage is one of those new opportunities that actually brings customers and vendors closer together in terms of what are the best cloud capabilities given that environment, leading them down the path for how to implement it. And so I think, you know, really it's come about as vendors have accelerated quite rapidly in terms of the cloud capabilities, and customers are now, you know, looking for ways to help catch up and be able to keep the same pace on that journey that vendors have been able to put out.
And I think that part of the reason for that is, or part of the outcome of that, I'm sorry, is I've noticed from vendors recently especially that, you know, there really hasn't been a focus on, oh, we have this new public cloud solution, we have this new private cloud solution. Rather, it's really a focus on we have both cloud, public and private, and non-cloud that can help meet your business need. And I think that the whole, you know, vendors learning from the customer migration process has taught them not necessarily focus on one area of the portfolio, rather bring everything together for that hybrid IT point of view to really, you know, promote those solutions to address those pain points. So we've looked at the cloud adoption rates, and we know that enterprises are adopting cloud, and we know that they're not getting there necessarily as quickly as vendors would have liked. So that in and of itself really creates an opportunity for vendors to take a step back and, you know, ask enterprises, you know, what are your biggest challenges and how can they be overcome in terms of cloud adoption? So we found that many of the challenges regarding cloud adoption are related to security and cost in some way, or are related to the internal IT versus LOB struggle. And that's really where, you know, a consultant can provide that kind of peace of mind or a mediation between the IT and LOB sides of the house. So the platforms themselves for integration and brokerage platforms, they definitely help automate the multi-cloud environments, bringing all of those services together through a single pane of glass and really helping to optimize the current cloud deployments. And then, so if you look at this graph, so we've sized out the brokerage and integration market. We expect that right now in 2015, the market is about $20 billion, and we expect that to grow to somewhere over $50 billion over the next 5 or so years. You can see from the graph the majority of that is the integration market, and that's really because there's a significant opportunity for vendors in terms of integration services specifically. So we'll take a look at it a little bit later in the next few slides, but the integration market is very heavily weighted towards services, and that's really the area that can be monetized on over the long term.
And really a lot of it starts with where the integration market is today, multi-$100 billion opportunity, making IT solutions work, whether it's hardware and software, and that's been around for quite some time, but certainly the focus we've seen is shifting to, we hear it all the time from our clients, how can we build more skills around cloud solutions, make sure clients know that for those engagements that aren't all traditional on-prem engagements, that there's work to be done around those. They're not all off the shelf. Most of them require the help of an integrator. And so as the client focus, customer focus has shifted to how to bring cloud solutions into that overall environment, we've certainly seen the focus for the large integrators to make that shift as well, and to supplement the declining or flat opportunity in terms of the on-prem integration opportunity, to build up those similar skills to build in the cloud-focused delivery assets and to do that. And so clearly part of what you're seeing here is the transition from customers from on-prem to cloud and the integration opportunity following right behind in terms of providing similar outcomes and experience that customers expect with the on-prem, or even better, I think safe to say even better when cloud is delivered, but also have that similar integration services experience that is a important part of the solution, whether it's on-prem or cloud.
So now that we took a look at the overall market and market size, we're going to dive in a little bit deeper into brokerage and integration specifically. So in the cloud brokerage market, right now we really see that as being dominated by the platforms. So those are platforms including cloud marketplaces, as well as aggregation platforms to bring all of the different cloud solutions together, where enterprises can kind of pick and choose which ones to run at any given point. The services in this market, however, are more of that metering and monitoring, really aggregating those services together so that the platform can run successfully, as well as reporting on usage and the true optimization of the cloud services. So I think that the services part of this market is small today. I think that the market is still very much emerging, and the platforms are really starting to become more mainstream. And I think going forward, especially over the next 5 years, we're going to see the market shift in the brokerage market specifically, and kind of have that split become more 50-50 between platforms and services, because the real longer-term opportunity for vendors to capitalize on is with the services. It's a longer type of contract. It's more heavily involved by the vendor. So I think that that's definitely something to look out for going forward, and we'll see more broker services specialists come about. So this slide is from our brokerage study that we published earlier this year. To orient you really quickly, it's just looking at the overall brokerage adoption at that point in time. So that was back in February, I believe. So to give kind of a starting point, so the survey included over 300 enterprises that adopted cloud, and then we further asked them, are you utilizing cloud brokerage? Yes, no, why, and why not? So if you see here, as of February, a third of the market was already adopting cloud brokerage, and another third was planning to, either within the next year or within the next 2 years. So now that it's almost been, 9 months or so, it's my assumption that probably half of that 25% that are planning to adopt have already adopted, and if you look towards the right, there's a third of the market that also had said, no, we don't plan to adopt cloud brokerage. They cited reasons such as we can build the capabilities in-house, or there was just this overall lack of education around what the solutions were, who the vendors were that were providing them, and what have you. I think over the past year, cloud vendors especially have done a much better job of marketing and promoting those capabilities and solutions. And there's been far more education and workshops and consulting services out there promoting the education of IT staff. So I think that a lot of these barriers are starting to be knocked down. I would absolutely expect that no figure of 33% to be significantly lower already now than it was even when the survey was taken.
Yeah. And I think the other thing from the customer side is we've seen as organizations move from kind of sporadic siloed use of cloud services, either at departmental level or with shadow IT, to either reach a point where the management becomes a pain point and they need to take a step back, pull in IT, look for outside help to do a better job of how to take a survey of what they have today, manage that, look at planning out their adoption going forward, or they reach this point where they start having more different types of workloads being considered that are going to be hybrid or pull in sensitive data, need some elements of either private cloud or leaving it on-prem, that those are all things that require heavy IT involvement, that bring together a more formalized planning process, and in almost all cases that we've run into involve a third-party services firm to come in and help walk them through how to really change the way that they're using cloud so that they can either better management, get it more efficient, or pave the way for how it's going to be used going forward. That those are all things that for organizations that have gone through that kind of transformation for the cloud adoption within their organization, those are the ones that all of a sudden, the ability to have the landscape of solutions or take some of the administrative overhead off of the way that they're deploying and using cloud services, those are all of a sudden value add. They recognize why a third party is a good fit for that solution so that they can really look at the higher value elements of the IT roadmap rather than getting bogged down in cataloging and monitoring the growing number of cloud services that are being deployed and used during the delivery of their IT workloads, because it's dynamic. Things change, the pricing changes, the usage changes. Those are all things that make it more difficult in a lot of respects to manage than something that's deployed, and as long as it's running, it's all set. So I think for those types of, there's that profile of customer that goes through that transformation that is kind of a genesis for where cloud services all of a sudden makes more sense than it did previously.
So I don't want to spend too much time on this slide, but so this is also from our brokerage study, and we asked the question, what are your expectations of a cloud broker? Do you expect one vendor to be able to handle all of your brokerage needs, or do you expect it to be multiple vendors, each focusing on a specific skill set? The overall, takeaway from this slide is that in North America and Europe specifically, there tends to be a lean towards wanting multiple vendors, understanding that not one vendor can handle all of your different brokerage needs, whereas in Asia, India and China specifically, it tends to be lean towards having one vendor that can do all of the different tasks of a brokerage function. I think that kind of alludes to, one, the smaller size of the IT staff, not necessarily having all of those skills in-house, as well as, you know, it being a budgetary issue. When you can get multiple solutions from one vendor, there's the option to bundle, and it's more cost-effective. So I think that that is plays a big role into this. But whereas in Europe, maybe where, you know, cloud environments are a little more mature, or there's more governance internally, that's where, you know, the multiple vendors piece really comes in, and where vendors can really specialize. So to orient you to this slide, it's kind of busy. So this is a snapshot of the cloud brokerage vendor landscape as of the second quarter of 2015. The vertical axis shows the absolute dollar growth in brokerage revenue, whereas the horizontal axis shows the year-to-year growth in percentage terms. The size of each company bubble is the size of their second quarter of 2015 revenue for cloud brokerage. That includes platforms as well as services. So here, as you can see, Aperio really stands out, and so does Odin in terms of their sheer footprints. They definitely have the biggest bubbles out of the bunch. But if you look to the right, this is where I think things can kind of get interesting. So you see IBM, Accenture, and Jamcracker out leading in terms of percentage growth. Yes, this is partially due to their size overall being smaller, so it's easier to grow something smaller faster, but also they've only really each, especially IBM and Accenture, really began to market their aggregation and brokerage capabilities not that long ago, but they have the resources at their fingertips to really take off in this space, whereas the pure plays really struggle with getting rounds of funding and can't necessarily act as quickly as an IBM or Accenture can. So some recent developments from the vendors on this graph. So we do include cloud marketplaces as aggregation platforms. So we've seen a number of vendors come out with cloud marketplaces recently. Dell, IBM come to top of mind. Jamcracker, which is interesting, so it's growing very fast, but it tends to, in my opinion, be a little bit quieter on the marketing front. So there's not as much news out there, but Jamcracker executives are showing up at more and more events, industry events, and really promoting their capabilities that way. And I think that's to really focus on getting those strategic partnerships really built up to provide that flavor of a revenue outlet. Accenture is buying its way into this market, so it picked up Tequila in May, and then most recently announced its intent to acquire Cloud Sherpas. I think that both of those acquisitions are going to very much help Accenture really accelerate its growth in brokerage and integration. And then Odin, the big blue bubble near the top. So Odin split off from Parallels only in March, and I think that the company's done a very good job so far of splitting off and really kind of running on its own. It's gotten more rounds of funding and really has been able to market its capabilities in a market that's all of a sudden starting to get pretty crowded. So now we're going to switch gears a little bit and focus on integration. So this slide, you saw it for the brokerage side of the coin. You can see that it's somewhat the inverse of the brokerage market. The services, again, is really what drives the sheer market size for integration, which we talked about earlier. And then we have the platforms. So that's platforms like MuleSoft or Dell Boomi or platform, which they've been doing a lot recently in the health and life sciences space specifically. So I think that while I do think that platforms will grow just due to the need for API functionality and capabilities, I do think that services is going to continue to be the dominant piece of this market going forward through 2020 and likely beyond that.
Yeah, I think what we've seen is a lot of, it may be, engagements may be partially supported by a platform, but for a lot of the interviews we've been doing with both the vendors that are in the services ecosystems for some of these platforms, as well as for customers, is that, you know, you're not going to get 100% of the capability off the shelf with an integration platform. That for most of these engagements, the need for services doesn't go away. That it's, you know, a little bit different skill set, a little bit different depth to the engagement, but for most of the integration opportunities, we're still seeing, even if platforms are involved, significant services opportunities. So it does kind of fuel this continued mix of platform enablement is important, but the services around it, you know, really are still a critical element for making it work.
And that actually ties into what we were going to talk about next. So as part of our customer studies, this is from the Cloud Professional Services study in particular, we ask, you know, where do you see the biggest increase in your level of investment among the 4 different service lines? And every time we've gotten this data back, it's been systems integration. Each different cloud solution that's adopted needs to be integrated within the broader environment. So as Allan was saying, this is the real opportunity, not just for the vendors of the platforms like MuleSoft or Dell Boomi, but also for their partners. Especially a lot of cloud platform vendors have really, really broad partner ecosystems, and that's where those partners can really capitalize on this opportunity. So this slide, similar to the one that we showed for the cloud brokerage market, this focuses on cloud integration. So that is both the integration platforms as well as the integration services. This one tends to not look as, how do I put this, as spaced out as the brokerage one, where really IBM is almost dwarfing the whole graph, so to speak. So its sheer revenue size alone is really big, plus the fact that it's growing very fast. HP also has a very big footprint in this space, but is growing much, much slower. So the true, you know, systems integrators like IBM, HP, even Accenture really hold the market in terms of, you know, just their sheer footprint, but it's the smaller, more pure play vendors that are really starting to take off in terms of growth. So we have Cloud Sherpas, smallest bubble over to the right, it's growing at over 100%. Now that, when you combine it with Accenture, is going to be pretty big cloud integration powerhouse. It'll help Accenture, you know, kickstart some innovation and really take on those cloud specialists that are certified in Salesforce and ServiceNow, and really, you know, promote that portfolio, the combined portfolio going forward. And to touch on IBM a little bit more, so not only does IBM have its, you know, global services organization to integration and implementation services, but it also has a lot of software assets in its integration platforms and tools portfolio. So those include its Sterling B2B integrator and IBM's API management, as well as, you know, multitude of automation tools. So that's really where, you know, we see IBM really taking off in this market. So we've talked about, you know, the overall cloud market, and we talked about the differences in brokerage and integration. But now we want to kind of talk about, you know, what's going to happen going forward. What are the different nuances in this market? It's a small market, it's an emerging market, so there's a lot of what-if scenarios to be had. So we've already touched on some of this a little bit throughout, But just looking at things from a geographic point of view, in North America, adoption rates are actually the lowest, and that's because they were the highest in previous years. So they're just farther along on the adoption curve than some more emerging markets in EMEA as well as APAC. But one thing to know about North America specifically is that enterprises are definitely more choosy. They're waiting for a vendor that can meet, their specific needs. They're more often utilizing a consultant or a third party to best advise, what to do for going forward for more of a longer term outlook. In Europe, the adoption rates are similar to those in the US, but different vendors really pop up as being more successful in the region. Capgemini has been very popular in brokerage and integration for a few years now in Europe, as well as Aperio. And I think Capgemini also benefits from its partnership with Gravitant. There's been a lot of kind of synergy there, and from conversations we've had with some customers in Europe, that tends to be a very positive attribute for Capgemini. And then in APAC, as we mentioned before, there's definitely fewer barriers to cloud adoption. We actually just did our cloud security study, and security is far less of a concern in APAC than it is in North America and Europe. And that coupled with, having less of a legacy IT infrastructure in place and having smaller IT staff, that really helps promote cloud adoption in general. And then as more cloud solutions are adopted, third parties are sought out to broker and integrate those environments. Now we're going to move to, I think, my favorite slide of this. So it's just looking at the overall brokerage and integration landscape, and especially from the key mergers and acquisitions announcements that have happened over the past 6 or so months. There's definitely a lot of activity here. So CSE, first with Service Mesh, then with Fruition Partners, Accenture first with Tequila, and now Cloud Sherpas. IBM is buying a lot of, I call it apps and database providers, as well as, buying Blue Box, which is an OpenStack integrator, and most recently with Meteorix, which specializes in Workday integrations. Play vendors that are maybe struggling to get rounds of funding and have all of these great ideas. The larger vendors see that, and it kind of makes a perfect marriage, so to speak. I think the big focus here with all of this acquisition activity is to really look at kind of the underlying trends. I think one of the big underlying trends of all these acquisitions is the demand for cloud-certified specialists and integrators. So with Cloud Sherpas, Accenture gained 1,100 of them. Accenture immediately brought 500 or so into its cloud-first applications team that are specifically focused on Salesforce integrations, and then the other 6 or so hundred are focused on Google and ServiceNow. Same goes for IBM with Meteorix, Workday certified specialists. So bringing those specialists in-house is very important because that's what people want. They want people who are very well versed in the technology, know it in and out, and can implement it and help onboard with that. So I think that demand all of a sudden from these bigger vendors is going to create somewhat of a talent shortage in the near term. I don't know if there's enough certified people to go around. So right now it's really the specialist type of market. They can demand certain, salaries or what have you, and be pretty expensive for these vendors to take on. So with all of that, we definitely think that this trend is going to continue. There's definitely going to be some more market consolidation for all of the reasons we've already mentioned. But the biggest question, I think, is who's next? I actually think, I think that cyber is definitely a company to watch. I know that HP is already doing work with them, so I think that they could be a good fit for HP. I think just last month, HP kind of, had some of its employees go to cyber, and HP is still owning the end client relationship. So I think that that's definitely a merger to watch out for. And for HP, again, I think we've seen a notable acquisition in the space from Accenture. We've seen one from IBM. Now I feel like HP is up next, and I would think that they're probably going to be looking for a company that's specialized somewhat in Amazon Web Services, because, HP already has Eucalyptus in-house now, and that seems to be, going well and being integrated within the broader cloud portfolio. And so to have specialists brought on who specialize in Amazon, I think would be a next logical step for them and would give a little bit of a differentiation away from, IBM and Accenture, who both now have Salesforce and Workday specialists. One company I think would fit that description would be Cloud Nexa. They've been coming up on our radar more and more lately. So I think that that's definitely something to watch. Or even Aperio. I think Aperio is a great company to watch in this space. As we saw from the brokerage slide, they have a big footprint there. They seem to be doing well, and they continue to get funding. Aperio is also a strategic partner of Amazon Web Services, so I think that that could also be a logical fit. I was actually going to say before this week, that Aperio would have been a really good fit for Dell, but now I don't think that Dell has any money left to buy it. So I'm not sure. I think maybe it could be a good fit for HP going forward. Other vendors to watch, again, the Gravitant Capgemini relationship, I think that's something that's of interest. And then companies that aren't covered in this benchmark yet, but I definitely have my sights on, are Blue Wolf. They specialize in Salesforce consulting and implementations, as well as, so we've been tracking Tech Mahindra for quite some time, but as part of the Tech Mahindra group is Mahindra Satyam Consulting. It focuses on Salesforce consulting and implementations again, and I think that that would be a good fit for maybe one of the more India-centric providers like a Wipro or a Cognizant.
Well, I think that's what we wanted to go through for today's presentation. I think to kind of summarize it up, we do see continued growth, particularly driven by customers reorganizing the way that they're using cloud, moving towards different types of workloads, and certainly going towards a hybrid type environment. Those are all things that are driving the need for both brokerage as well as integration. And as Cassandra says, not too many of the graphs that we look at for major markets do you see vendors that, are not some of the largest providers showing up. This is one where there is an advantage for those that entered early on, a lot of which continue to remain independent, and that we do expect to see both growth for across the board, but also because of that, a consolidation in this space, because whether you look at the brokerage platforms or a lot of the integrators, that there's a lot of diversity in terms of who's built skills in these areas, and we think that those assets are going to be even more important and desired by customers, and as a result, some of the larger vendors going forward. So with that, we will open it up for questions.
a lot of them. We're just trying to compile them all into one list right now. Let's see. So we have a question. What percentage of the cloud integration and services market is using a cloud brokerage platform or other tools/automation to actually deliver and manage those services? How do you count for that in the platform versus services separation line? So for each of the vendors, we take a look at their cloud portfolios. We really dive deep, figure out, you know, what's a brokerage platform versus what's a brokerage kind of software tool, and then what's a brokerage service. And we do the same thing for cloud integration. We do draw the line between, you know, what's pure cloud versus what's pure non-cloud, so to speak, and that is how we are arriving at these numbers. So in this presentation, we didn't dive deep enough. We only touched on the top line, brokerage revenue and integration revenue. We do split it out in our research to include, you know, that separation between brokerage platforms and services. An example to use top of mind is, so Rackspace offers fanatical support with each of its cloud engagements. So we, based off of, you know, research we've done and talking to customers and what have you, we draw a percentage of an entire cloud engagement. What percentage do we think is purely either infrastructure as a service, and then what percentage is that value-added support and services layer?
Yeah, so I think the way that we're looking at it is making sure we're very clear on the vendor side what types of offerings and services they have available, looking at as much vendor detail as we can, and then rounding that out by looking at, on the adoption side, the type of engagement techniques and the split between when are they subscribing to a platform versus receiving a more customized service from a vendor. So that's the way that we're looking at that. What sometimes can be a fine line, but really it's about, for the customer, is it something where there's a platform that either they're using or they're paying the vendor to manage for them, or is it truly delivered as a service?
We have some questions that are kind of similar to that one, so we'll just go ahead and address those now. Another one was asking, how do you account for multiple broker services within an organization where they have managed services, software services, and professional services that all account across the brokerage service? So at TBR, we have our own cloud taxonomy where we, you know, draw the line between managed services versus professional services versus more of a software type service. So we do take all of that into consideration, and then when we're modeling deeper into brokerage and integration, we map the brokerage and integration revenue back to our broader taxonomy and portfolio so that we're including only the right segments in that segment.
Yep, and I think for most of the, even for some of the smaller vendors that we're covering here, most have both a platform, or at least one platform, as well as different flavors of professional services that kind of round out those offers. So it's not uncommon to see that, you know, number of different techniques involved in terms of how to address either brokerage or integration for their customers.
We just had a question come in. I'm going to pick this one because I like it. Do you think OpenStack is going to solve a lot of problems in the cloud integration/brokerage space and therefore change the market landscape? I actually think that OpenStack is complicating the process. So I think in theory, OpenStack is a great idea. Provides a standard upon which people can build their cloud solutions, and it gives vendors a framework to build upon. However, enterprise adoption of OpenStack is very slow, and there's a lot of hesitation. And that's why I think that there are companies dedicated to bringing OpenStack into the enterprise and migrating everything over. So those are companies like Morantis and Blue Box. So for now, no, I don't think that OpenStack is going to solve anything. I think right now it's still kind of a lofty idea.
And I think also when you look at where we see a lot of the adoption of brokerage and integration, the infrastructure is one piece, but certainly the applications carry their own difficulties. And so if you kind of think about the infrastructure level up, OpenStack, I do believe, will ease some of those infrastructure pain points. But I think as you get into either the platform or the application level, which is where we see a fair amount of the need and the interest, that's where OpenStack might help at one level, but certainly there's application level pieces that need to be managed and brokered and integrated as well. And so I agree with Cassandra. I think it will over time change the landscape for infrastructure, but in the meantime, a lot of the higher level integrations and brokerage, it doesn't have as big of an impact.
What are the most popular use cases today that are driving the need for cloud brokerage? What about for next year / down the line? I think we've kind of alluded to it already, but really just that whole idea of hybrid IT and cloud sprawl and really trying to bring together all of the different solutions into a single pane of glass, utilize a vendor to help manage that entire process from implementation all the way down to, managing the day-to-day reporting and usage and all of that.
Yeah, I think it's a little bit different between integration and brokerage today. I think you still see a lot of those IT-led engagements around the integration piece can occur at all levels of the stack, and they're a little bit different dynamic when we look at brokerage. I think overall I would say that there's more involvement across the business from the use of those tools, the participation, the selection of cloud services, the administration of them, the chargeback. So I think as you get into with more line of business involvement, they're looking at changing cost over time, estimation, right fit services across the portfolio. That's where brokerage, it's not just an IT audience a lot of times, it is more of a business audience that's involved in that. And so organizations that have gone through that transformation, which drives IT and line of business closer together, I think is a typical scenario that we see for the adoption of a brokerage platform and use of brokerage services.
Do you see movement in integrating public clouds with mega public clouds such as Amazon Web Services, Azure, Google, aka hybrid cloud? If yes, what type of activities are there?
So certainly I think we've seen it to some degree in terms of integrating multiple call them mega clouds together. I think in a lot of ways there's still barriers in some level of standardization for most companies there. They may have both different flavors of those public cloud services within their environment, but I think even now we're seeing kind of preference among the users for one environment over another. And so I don't think, it doesn't show up highly at the infrastructure level, certainly for the integration and the hybridization of clouds at that level. I do think that if you look at some of the more prominent applications providers on the public cloud side, that we've seen more examples and incidents of customers using multiple applications, wanting to consolidate data, centrally manage, kind of have more of an end-to-end cloud app solution. And so I think that's the example where we see more of that mega cloud to mega cloud type integration rather than at the infrastructure level at this point.
All right, so I think that's all we have for time today. So thank you, Allan and Cassandra, and thank you everyone for your questions. If your question wasn't answered, we will follow up with you after, because we did get a lot of questions on our content here today. So Before we go, I would like to remind everyone, please follow our analysts on Twitter here and follow TBR on Twitter as well. I'd also like to remind you that I will be following up with all of you via email tomorrow with the recording link for today's presentation as well as with the slides. So I'll leave the chat function open for another minute or so for people to ask any last-minute questions. Otherwise, thank you for attending and have a great afternoon.